The news this morning has a former NFL All-Pro cornerback on the move, but it's not Jalen Ramsey. Jaire Alexander being cut by the Green Bay Packers. What does that foreshadow for the Dolphins and Jalen Ramsey? We're getting into that here today on Locked On Dolphins.
You are Locked On Dolphins, your daily Miami Dolphins podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome to another episode of Locked On Dolphins. It is your team every day here on the Locked On Network. I'm your host, Cal Krebs, a lifelong Miami Dolphins fan, host of Locked On Dolphins, co-host of Locked On NFL Scouting, author of Touchdown Miami on Substack, and NFL staff writer for A to Z Sports. Want to give a special welcome and shout out to our everydayers because it is your team every day. We don't just say it, we live it. You're on the Locked On Network. Today on the show, nothing like a little bomb on a Monday morning to get your news cycle started off right. Jaire Alexander being cut by the Green Bay Packers, and the reaction for a lot of Dolphins fans early on has been interest in potentially adding Jaire Alexander to the roster, concern about what Jaire being cut means for the Dolphins' bid to move on and trade Jalen Ramsey. So I thought it would be a good idea this morning to pivot and take that hard turn off of the path of where we were going to go with content today and instead look at Jaire Alexander, how he got to this situation, why he was cut. There's been some reports of an accepted trade that got axed based off of financials with Alexander and another team in the AFC East. So we'll get into all that. So let's start with Jaire Alexander, who former first-round cornerback, was 18th overall pick in the 2018 NFL Draft. Excellent player when he's healthy. He's twice second-team All-Pro, twice made the Pro Bowl. Was a star when he first came into the league. Jaire, though, the past 4 seasons has really struggled with staying on the field, and this is one of the big differentiators for me between the Jalen Ramsey situation and the Jaire Alexander situation. We'll get into that a little bit later in the show. But Jaire has played in 4, 16, 7, and 7 games the last 4 seasons. It's about 1,900 snaps he has played since 2021, the start of the 2021 season. And the only year that he was healthy out of that block, he had 5 picks and was a Pro Bowler and a second-team All-Pro, right? It's not a talent question. But you are missing over 50% of snaps in a 4-year sample size through the physical prime of your career, age 24, 25, 26, and 27 seasons. We played in 4, 16, 7, and 7. Double-digit games missed in each of the last 2 seasons, and then missed 3/4 of a season in 2021 is kind of a troubling trend for a guy who is going into his age 28 season. He'll turn 29 next February. So he'll be 28 all of 2025. All right. And as a player who didn't have any guarantees left on his contract, the Packers kind of said, okay, you're due about $17 million per year in each of the next 2 years. There was some expectation for a trade, and then it sounded like maybe they were trending back towards smoothing things over with Jaire. There was an incident where he went out to serve as a captain, but he wasn't picked as a captain. So then there was locker room friction on top of that. It's just like a goofy incident in addition to you get paid a lot of money to not be out on the field. I think it was the Packers owner who recently said, Jaire Alexander's a great player, but we're used to being without him. You talk about an indictment of the health and durability of Jaire Alexander. And that, for me, is one of the big blockades of having a great big appetite for the Dolphins, maybe setting their eyes on Jaire Alexander as an answer to their cornerback room. I expect the Dolphins will probably do their due diligence, and there is a price point in which I could say, hey, this is a gamble worth taking relative to what else you have in the cornerback room and how available these, how ready these guys are to play at a high level. Do I expect the Dolphins to have some level of interest? I'm sure they will as an unrestricted free agent now that they could negotiate a new deal with. If Jaire didn't want to give up any of the money that he was scheduled to get and then subsequently turn down an amended and adjusted contract with the Packers which had incentives in it, but required a pay cut up front from the $17 or so million he was scheduled to get. I suspect Jaire is not going to have a great appetite for a team-friendly price point, which is what the Dolphins are currently fishing for. And they had a visit and an offer with Rasul Douglas that was not accepted because the Dolphins are trying to find it at their price point. And if they're fishing for their price point, I would be very surprised if them being selective versus some of the other teams across the league who are not in the midst of a roster transition and looking at scaling back some of their cash spend might have a little bit better appetite to give Jaire a higher base and then incentives to stack on top of it. I look at some teams across the league. The Dolphins currently sitting about $13.5, $14 million in cap space. There are teams like Washington and Minnesota that you could point to and say these teams, you could add a corner and really change some of the outlook of your team. The Raiders have $36 million in cap space, and while they're not expected to be competitive, they flushed their whole secondary out, and they've got a lot of dollars that they could potentially throw at a problem. And if that's where Jaire's priorities are, maybe there's a playtime opportunity and a dollar opportunity there. So I look at Jaire Alexander and some of the durability questions, the fact that he didn't have guaranteed money on his contract and that allowed the team to be willing to cut him. It doesn't add up as like a sprint to the podium. Oh, he's a Pro Bowl player. You need to sign him, right? Because it goes back to you're not paying a player for what they've been. You're paying a player for what they're going to be. Well, now you're an age 28 corner who's missed over 50% of the snaps and over 50% of games in the last 4 seasons. That all adds up to me as not a very appealing mix. Now, if Jaire's going to be more focused on where's there an opportunity, where's there a chance for me to maybe play on a 1-year deal and then parlay and bet on myself to stay healthy, maybe I'm a little bit more willing to take the right situation as compared to the right dollars. Maybe that puts the Dolphins in play. And if the dollars are right, I wouldn't be mad if you signed Jaire. Well, it depends on the terms of the contract, but I might be mad if you signed Jaire Alexander. But there's probably a half dozen other guys that I would kind of put in that bucket, and they all have risk right now, whether it's Stephon Gilmore or Mike Hilton or Jack Jones or Rasul Douglas or Asante Samuel Jr. or Shaq Griffin. They all have risk for different reasons. The risks for Jaire versus the reward based on the last 4 years of sample size of Jaire Alexander, just for me, would not be super appealing, personally. So how is it different than Ramsey? Should you be concerned that the Packers had to cut Jaire Alexander for the Dolphins' bid to move on from Jalen Ramsey? My answer is no, and I'm going to tell you why. It's on the other side of it. Make sure you guys stick with us. You ever checked your bank account and wonder, where'd all my money go? Between the dining out, online entertainment, all at the touch of your fingertips, online shopping, you name it, it's very easy to lose track of your spend. That's where Monarch Money comes in. It's your personal CFO, gives you full visibility and control over your finances, but it's not just a budgeting app. Monarch Money gives you a complete financial command center where you can track all of your accounts, investments, and spending all in one place. So you can stop managing your money and start building wealth. For me, it was kind of eye-opening to see all of those 2-door delivery services as I'm up here in the film room and then working away and just get the bag delivered at the front door. Well, when you see the numbers of just how much that costs every month, it opens your eyes a little bit. Now I can budget smarter and save more. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNFL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com. Code LOCKEDONNFL for half off of your first year. I will say I don't think another cornerback on the market necessarily helps the timeliness of a resolution to the Jalen Ramsey situation. And I think it does kind of underscore the reality of what kind of compensation the Dolphins will be getting back. But the big differences between Jalen Ramsey and Jaire Alexander is this. Jalen Ramsey's salary this year is fully guaranteed. Jaire Alexander's was not. So that means the Dolphins are, if they cut Jalen Ramsey, they're going to have to pay that entire lump sum of money. That's going to make the team more willing to play ball on paying a portion. Now, it was reported, and Jordan Schultz had the report that the Bills and the Packers had agreed to terms on a deal to trade Jaire to Buffalo. Buffalo didn't want to pay the full $17 million salary. Jaire Alexander didn't want to take a pay cut, and the Packers didn't want to pay any money that they didn't have to because the money wasn't guaranteed. So the deal never got done, and then you got past June 1st, and then they just said, yeah, we're just gonna cut Jaire Alexander. And it's not worth the extra cash to spend to buy whatever probably late round draft pick they were going to get for Jaire Alexander. The Dolphins don't have that luxury to play hardball with the dollars. Now, it hurts their negotiation. It puts more back onto the teams that they're negotiating with to say, hey, we really need you to pay X amount of the salary for us to move and bring in Jalen Ramsey. But the Dolphins have to do that because they reworked the contract that had multiple years left on the deal to put more guarantees into the contract. Because if you cut him, you're going to lose another $21 million, right? So would you rather lose $21 million to cut him because the offers you're getting in the trade market aren't particularly good, or would you rather take what you can get, which is probably a 5, maybe a 4, pay whatever portion of the salary and lose $10 million and get a 4th or 5th round draft pick back versus get nothing and then pay 21 and pay twice as much money? It makes no sense to say, well, we're going to stand on principle and not pay any of the salary because it's guaranteed. You have to pay it unless you get somebody to take whatever portion you're willing to spend. So I look at the Bryce Huff deal with the 49ers and the Eagles took on about 60% of that. Obviously, you're looking at that from a Jalen Ramsey perspective, and you'd be talking about a little over $10 million. I don't think they'll have to spend that much, and maybe if they did spend that much, maybe you get a higher draft pick, maybe a conditional 4 that could go up to 3. The other thing is the durability of the players. Jalen Ramsey had a freak injury and missed half the season with a meniscus tear with a freak injury in training camp. And I know he's an older player, but Jaire had those injury issues through the prime of his career. Whereas Jalen Ramsey's played in over 1,000 snaps in 3 of the last 4 seasons. Versus Jaire, similar price point, is playing 1,900 snaps divided by 4. It's an average of less than 500 snaps a season. And in the year that Jalen missed half the year, he still played like almost 600 snaps. So that all adds up to me as it makes the opportunity to add Ramsey, who I think is also, even at this stage of his career, a little bit more of a diverse player. Those are things that work in the Dolphins' favor. Ramsey does not have the injury issues that Jaire Alexander does. I think he's a more diverse talent than what Jaire Alexander is. But then also the Dolphins have to be more willing to pay some of and not kill trade offers because we don't want to pay the salary. Well, of course you don't want to pay the salary, but it's guaranteed. So if you cut him, you're going to lose all of it. And you'd have to be so dense to say, we're not going to accept a 4th or 5th round pick and pay $5 million of Jalen Ramsey's salary because we don't want to pay $5 million and then have to cut him and pay $21 million. That's the biggest differences for me on the spectrum of where Jaire Alexander and Jalen Ramsey's situations lie. So I don't think it forebodes anything negative about the Dolphins' ability to get a deal done, but I do think it underscores that whatever your expectations are for a return on investment in a trade with Ramsey probably needs to be a little conservative. Like you're not going to get the moon. You're not going to get a super high asset back. And you didn't really give a high asset to get him, right? It was a 3 and Hunter long 2 years ago. Now he's an older player. So as long as your expectations, I think, kind of fall in that we have this situation we have to work our way out of, there are teams that are interested, and the teams did start calling the Dolphins again last weekend when it got past June 1st. The Dolphins might not feel any pressure to get a deal done right now. They might string this out to try to maximize their value, or somebody has an injury. And that's maybe the place where the Jaire Alexander situation could complicate things for you. Is another corner's on the market. Does that serve as a more attractive option for teams than trading for Jalen Ramsey? And that goes back to how comfortable are you with the durability stuff? What kind of price point is Jaire Alexander looking for? But there's potentially also, this could move pretty quick as well for a player like Jaire. And we'll get into that next. Why I think this one, he might not waste a lot of time trying to find his next spot. We're getting into that next here, Locked On Dolphins. So make sure you guys stick with us. All right. So Jaire, if he waits and some more of the destinations get burned up, because we went through a bunch of other names. Stephon Gilmore, Rasul Douglas, Shaq Griffin, Jack Jones, Asante Samuel Jr., who is maybe still a month out from finding his market, and Mike Hilton, about a half dozen other names that are viable starting corners. If those names start to come off the board before Jaire Alexander, I think that probably hurts his demands because of the durability that he has as a player in his last 4 years of body of work. So if I were Jaire Alexander, and if I were Jaire Alexander's representation, I would be looking to find a team that has cash to offer, has a playing time opportunity, and gets me somewhere into my ballpark. I would not want to be one of the later dominoes to go, because you lose leverage as more players come off. How does that impact the Dolphins? I think if Jaire and only Jaire comes off the board relatively quickly, then this can just kind of be a swell in the tide, and it's in and it's out of picture. And then everything with your negotiations with these other teams can resume. And it's really just a matter of, when are you willing to bend on how much you're willing to pay on the contract? Or alternatively, when does a team have a sudden change and a need at corner that changes their urgency to get a needle-moving player like Jalen Ramsey? So it's all, this is why these kinds of moves don't happen. Like right now, everybody across the league is kind of playing chicken with each other, right? Who's going to blink first? Who's going to blink first and make the first commitment that sets the benchmark and the threshold for all the other players that are looking for their dollars? Who's going to blink first and be the first team that commits to a player or ups their offer to take a player off the board, where maybe if you waited it out, you could get a different player? And that's why the saying deadline spur action is always so applicable in the NFL with these off-season hurdles. And you saw it with Aaron Rodgers, right? At the end of last week, where Rodgers strung this thing out for as long as he possibly could. And then you're ready to go to mini camp, and the Steelers are kind of fed up, and you started hearing some rumblings that maybe the Steelers were going to look at a pivot and maybe look at Kirk Cousins, and Aaron Rodgers says, "Oh, I'm just kidding. I'm going to sign." So I think having a new stone thrown into the water can potentially facilitate some movement from the corner market, which would be good. Now, if you're the Dolphins, because you have a guaranteed salary on your books, I would not get too cute either. I would not sit here and string this thing out and then all the other players that you like sign, in part because you need to sign somebody to replace Jalen Ramsey, and you need to know how much you're paying. Part of me feels like everybody's waiting on the Dolphins. And maybe that's a good place to be. I don't know that for certain, but it certainly feels like if you can get 35-year-old Stephon Gilmore or get 30-year-old Jalen Ramsey, depending on the cost and depending on the compensation, you might want to do that. If you could get Jalen Ramsey or if you could get Shaq Griffin, you'd rather have Jalen Ramsey, right? As a team that's not dealing with the scar tissue that the Dolphins and Jalen Ramsey have right now, right? Is in a perfect world, Jalen Ramsey would just be here, but it's an imperfect world, and Jalen has his own priorities and initiatives and what he wants the rest of his career to look like. And he's doing the thing that he's done, which is take matters into his own hands. He's always done that. So don't be surprised when it turns around and bites you. And I saw him bite those other two teams. I didn't think he was going to bite me. So that's just the unfortunate reality of the world that the Dolphins are living in right now. But Jaire Alexander, in short, I don't think particularly undercuts anything the Dolphins are trying to do, other than maybe all those teams now put a line in the water and get a feel for Jaire Alexander. But kind of reading the tea leaves on what Jaire's priorities were in trying to sort out a destination or trying to sort out a resolution with Green Bay, I don't think he's going to do teams any favors. And therefore, it kind of just falls back into Miami's lap of how much are you willing to pay? Now, right now, the Dolphins are looking at a $10.6 million dead cap charge to move on from Ramsey by trading him. If you have to pay the option bonus he's owed, it's another $20 million. You're talking about a $30 million dead cap charge, or maybe you can prorate it out and it would be like $15 million this year, but then it would be like $33 million next year. So you have to be willing to bend. And because you have to be willing to bend, there's going to be a price point that's lower than $20 million and paying all of it, that a team's going to say, you know what, we want Jalen Ramsey because we want to be assured that he's going to come to our team and not hit free agency and go sign with somebody else. But the Dolphins are going to have to pay up. They're going to have to pay a portion of this, and they're going to have to take it on the nose because they chose to do business with Jalen Ramsey last summer when Ramsey wanted a contract adjustment while being here for 1 year. Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. Ramsey got him twice, so shame on them. That's going to do it for us here today on the show. Kyle Krabs, you can keep it locked in right here on Locked On Dolphins. It is your team every day. Appreciate you guys as always for checking the show. Make it a great rest of your Monday, and we will be back again tomorrow unless we get some news this afternoon for more Miami Dolphins talk coming your way. We hope to see you then. Go Fins.